Maddie didn't mean to do this, but I hear this song and it just makes me completely nostalgic because me, the Billy Joel nut, this is the first Billy Joel album that I heard 52nd Street from start to finish and memorized the whole thing. I won't sing this song with you, but I can. Connor O'Gara is with us from Saturday Down South. We introduced him last week with the Super Bowl Shuffle. Now we're giving him 1979 Billy Joel love songs. Are you all right with Billy Joel, Connor? I know you love the Super Bowl Shuffle.
I'll allow it. I've heard worse to be introed. It wouldn't be my first go-to. I was never a big Billy Joel guy growing up. Can't say that that's my favorite sound. But you know what? I'm not going to be opposed to it. Any music is good music, so I'm not going to complain.
You are such an ambassador when it comes to answering some things. I think that's what you just did, but I appreciate that very much. We had I know you would look at it like there were 6 spring games last weekend. There were 5. Arkansas didn't play a spring game. They had an indoor practice that was televised, and it looked like everybody's mom and dad and best friend was there too. That was a jam-packed facility. What did you glean watching the Razorback spring thing this last weekend, which was televised, of course?
It was televised, and I watched it, of course, because I'm a loser, and that's just what I do. But, yeah, I've been in situations like that. I remember when I was covering Indiana football, there was lightning in the area, and they're like, all right, we got to take it inside. And that was before they had, like, a real great practice facility to do that with, and it was just ugly. It was a mess, and it's just overcrowded. Similar vibes to the Arkansas one where you got recruits and their parents standing off to the side and all that. But I was interested to kind of see a few things. We weren't necessarily going to see the full arsenal, of course, but Malik Hornsby was a guy I was looking pretty close at. How are they going to use him? We talked about this last week. Are they going to actually incorporate him as a receiver in some of these spots? Are they going to get creative with the way that they use him in the ground game? Are they going to actually use him as a backup quarterback and bring him in for meaningful reps to kind of take some of that pressure off of KJ Jefferson? I think all these things can be true at the same time. I don't think he's ever going to come into the SEC and become even an average passer. All right, like maybe he's going to continue to develop, and I'm not just taking that from the 4-14 stat line that we saw, but there's nothing to me that says he's going to be an effective passer in the SEC. So how do you keep him involved? He entered the portal for a week, of course, in January, and I think sometimes it's just lip service to kind of keep these guys from transferring to say, oh, we're going to use you in all these creative ways. I realistically think they're going to try and incorporate him with the offense, not with just some 2-quarterback system. And I think that kind of seeing some of that play out where they did have some different looks for him, I thought that was a smart move. And if I took away anything from what was a very, very controlled scrimmage, I thought that was the big takeaway.
Yeah, there's a lot. I think there's a lot to go off of by Hornsby in the way that he's thrown the ball, and I think you might be right about that. And once he gets the enjoyment of wide receiver, and scores that first touchdown there, and really starts impacting the game from that position, maybe that's the thing that he ends up sliding to anyway. You want to have fun on the football field, and being on the field when you're an athlete and contributing is a lot of fun. Sitting there waiting to for QB1 to be hurt or for something like that to happen, that's no fun. I think you're right about that.
Okay, here's 3 guys that come to mind when I think of this Malik Hornsby situation: John Rice Plumlee, Joey Gatewood, and then kind of watching. I mean, it's not necessarily an exact parallel, but there's something to be said for like switching to receiver. DK Joyner doing it the way that he did at South Carolina, where now he's just in this role that, like Keaton Thompson at Virginia, if anybody has watched him, his position is football player. Like that's what he is listed as right now. Even PFF has him listed as football player. These guys who are former quarterbacks who at some point in their college career realized, look, I'm not going to be the guy in this day and age wherein you actually need to be able to kind of stretch the field. You need to be accurate. If you're less than 60% accurate as a passer, it's kind of like, what are you doing? Like, you got some issues to figure out. Can Malik Hornsby kind of have that sense of self-awareness to realize, like, all right, what's my role if I want to play at a Power 5 level, like what the SEC West really requires? And can he be used not necessarily just in a gadget-type way in the way that we've seen John Rice Plumlee in the past and Joey Gatewood, who's now playing receiver at UCF? Both of those guys are now at UCF, ironically enough. But like, can he be used in creative enough packages to where he is impacting the game, and he might not ever be a high volume type guy, but where you can split him out wide for the occasional play, you can use him in some of these running packages, and instead of just having to worry about KJ, Rocket Sanders, Dominique Johnson, AJ Green, you're like, oh, there's a fifth guy I got to prepare for. I think there's something to be said for that, for bringing him into these games where you're up 14 points, and you want to not necessarily have all of those reps going to KJ in those spots, because he gets hit even on those RPOs. All right, that's the other thing to keep in mind for somebody who just went through knee surgery and all that. So I'd like to be able to see Malik kind of used in that way and to tap into the way that we've seen some of these other guys accept their roles.
Mm-hmm. And Connor, it's hard to really pick, fact from fiction when you're talking about, spring practice and what you might see in a spring practice like Arkansas, or spring games like we saw around the SEC, because you mentioned it, trying to keep people happy. And there are always these questions that come into these spring games. And I saw you wrote an article for Saturday Down South about questions that you have for any of the 6 SEC spring games that took place on Saturday. Did any of them get answered? Because so many times, so many questions go unanswered until we actually see teams out on the field Labor Day weekend or game one.
Yeah, I didn't really, like with Arkansas specifically, you didn't really see the connection a whole lot with Jaden Hazelwood just yet. I think that we saw the question with Georgia and the Brock Vandegrift hype train, for those who have been kind of following his storyline as a former 5-star quarterback recruit who's entering year 2. I think there were a lot of Georgia fans who were really hoping they were going to see him kind of take that next step, but it was pretty clear he was the third best quarterback on the field when Stetson Bennett looked the part as a starter, and Carson Beck actually looked better than the bunch. And he's somebody that Georgia fans are desperate to try and keep around and have him not transfer before this May 1st deadline. So I thought we kind of got an answer to that question. The Jermaine Burton, Bryce Young connection in Alabama, that's going to be a big national storyline this year, with Jermaine Burton crossing enemy lines, going from Georgia to Alabama, and potentially being their number one receiver this year, somebody with 2 years of starting experience at the SEC level. You didn't really see a ton of that with him. They tried to get him involved early and force-feed him targets, but really not a whole lot going for him. And then, you can go around and Mississippi State, you didn't even get to see a spring game at all. So, talk about Arkansas and how controlled that was. At least they were able to have something, whereas Mississippi State wasn't. And then, South Carolina, I thought with Spencer Rattler, I don't know that you can say definitively that he's won over the locker room because it's a spring game. You're not talking about losing and what it could potentially look like if things aren't going well. That's the big question we're going to have of him moving forward, and somebody that's going to have just so many eyeballs on him in South Carolina this year. But I thought overall there were definitely some takeaways. But, yeah, it is a controlled scrimmage, and we can't let takes run amok like they very often do.
Yeah, and with it being so controlled and you never really get to see anything, has it changed your mind about anybody? Would your preseason rankings change today than what they were Thursday before any of these games happened?
No, not officially. Look, I think that you got a reminder, if you watch the Alabama spring game and you are one of those people that didn't really think Will Anderson should be in New York for the Heisman Trophy ceremony, you watched him in that game have to be taken out because it was too unfair for him to be on the field and the offense couldn't get real looks. I mean, that's how dominant this guy is. The man amongst boys thing is so cliche, but he looked like a guy who came back from the NFL to play at his high school or something. It was that bad. I mean, he's just blowing these Alabama offensive linemen off the block. It's not even close. I mean, if you're trying to have takeaways, I thought one of the interesting ones for me was watching what Robbie Ashford did at Auburn a week ago, and watching the Oregon transfer didn't really have an opportunity to play spring football because he was doing baseball, and now he comes back to his home state in Alabama after 2 years of not getting a snap at Oregon, and I thought he looked the part and has a chance to be Auburn's QB1 this year. So, yeah, I mean, there are definitely some takeaways. What's probably going to be more interesting is seeing the way that these spring games impact the transfer portal before the May 1st deadline. That's what we're going to be talking about probably next week, and seeing which one of these guys, probably going to be a few household names who enter that kind of catch us off guard.
Well, Connor, we did get news from Coach Pittman after the practice on Saturday, the scrimmage on Saturday, that he and the athletic department have agreed to a new contract. I don't think nothing's been signed yet, but apparently dollar figures are good, and there's a non-compete in there, according to Coach Pittman. And he said we've all known, that he's not leaving Arkansas. Like, I mean, he said this from the start. This is his last job. So he said that this has a lot to do with recruiting, with stability, to show to recruits that he's not going anywhere. And I kind of felt like we all thought that to begin with.
Well, you can have that mindset, and I agree 100%. When Sam Pittman says, "I'm going to retire in Hot Springs, Arkansas," you believe him. You see it. I mean, you see the guy with the Hogs statue, fountain, whatever you want to call it, on his property, and you're like, that's not the look of a guy who's going anywhere. And at this stage in his life, yeah, that's huge. And I believe him when he says that they have an agreement in place, and they're just a matter of crossing the T's, dotting the I's, doing the whole deal. And I'm sure we'll hear about this really soon. But it is kind of important in that regard, because if this stuff continues before what's a really important period in recruiting now, with the way that the cycle sets up with the early signing period, the last thing you want is any sort of rumor coming out that, there's this disagreement with Sam Pittman and Hunter Yurachek. I mean, nobody in that position wants to be in that spot where there's anything that can be used as negative recruiting against you with your stability at a program. So, yeah, I mean, he's right. It is used for that, and this is somebody who has taken such a team-friendly deal. If there's such a thing in this day and age in college football, that it's not surprising to hear someone like Sam Pittman even have a non-compete in there. I mean, that's just so unbelievably fitting that you don't have to worry about him getting poached necessarily, but yeah, I would expect this to be announced, and we'll figure out what those figures are probably really soon here.
Yeah. Connor, real quick, Tony Vitello getting in trouble in Knoxville for bumping an umpire. Is there anybody on the football side of the SEC that you could see getting a little too close to a ref and possibly making actual physical contact like that?
Well, now that Will Muschamp's out of the conference, I guess he's in the conference still at Georgia's sideline, but I'm pretty sure they'll do a good job of holding him back as just the coordinator. But, I really don't know that there's a lot of guys wired that way. Stoops is the one that kind of comes to mind. Saban, at this point of his career, if he hasn't done it yet, not at this stage, not on the wrong side of stuff. That's just not happening. Stoops, though, still has that fire. Like last year, we saw Stoops call a timeout just to yell at refs about it was some sort of missed call or a bad call on the defense. He calls a timeout just to yell at the refs, where he gets that red face going, and you're like, man, this guy's Youngstown tough. He could definitely kind of unload on one and have like one of those moments where he just kind of loses it. Probably not, but he's kind of the guy that comes to mind for me. Maybe Brian Kelly. I mean, Brian Kelly's had some pretty famous red face blow-ups himself. But, yeah, those are the two that kind of come to mind. I wouldn't see that happening anytime soon, though.
Con, appreciate you, man. It's always good to talk to you. Growing up in Pittsburgh, I have my own idea of what Youngstown tough means. That is the halfway point right in the middle between Pittsburgh and Cleveland. It's a very interesting town. Very interesting.
The Steelers town, mostly.
Well, for the most part, but it's got some guys who are very well connected, if you know what I mean.
BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting needs, sports info, and odds. Find all the latest sports developments, including this week's odds for the Masters Championship and the start of Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino and poker games. It's super easy to get started, so join today. Learn why everyone is saying BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on popular sports and games. Bet online, where the game starts.